Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Judy, for that music at the beginning of the service. Last week I talked about the theology of love. I spoke about how love is something we do rather than something we believe in. And I concluded with 1 Corinthians 13, the chapter on love. This passage has been kind of standard reading at weddings. Love is patient, love is kind, love is not boastful or jealous, etc. This actually is a fairly recent translation of the passage. The Revised Standard Version of the Bible was released in 1952, and it was an update of the Revised Version published in 1885 and the American Standard Version published in 1901. These were all attempts to update the Bible from Elizabethan image of the Elizabethan English of the King James Bible. Now, the King James Bible in this passage uses the word charity, but these newer translations use the word love. And these new translations were met with resistance from conservative Christians who preferred the rhythms of Shakespeare coming out of Jesus' mouth rather than everyday English. And those who took the words of the Bible literally were suspicious of any change to the words. The National Council of Churches, in order to promote this Bible in 1952, chose to make it distinctive on the shelf from other Bibles and gave it a nice red cover in the midst of the McCarthy era. King's College of London reports on their website, the RSV, like all other revisions, endured some withering criticisms. Pamphlets with titles such as the New Blasphemous Bible and the Bible of the Antichrist indicate the strength of feeling against it in some quarters. And some of the revisers even found themselves the focus of interest to Joseph McCarthy's Committee of Investigation into Un-American Activities for supposedly communist leanings. But it also was immediately successful. 12 million copies being sold within 2 years of publication. People liked to hear the Bible in a language that they actually spoke. But this shows us that conspiracy theories are nothing new. In 1952, the Red Bible was accused of being communist because it did such things as change the word charity to love. Now, the King James used that word charity to translate the word agape, which means unconditional love. And so charity is a reasonable translation. Agape is giving with no expectation of return. Another Greek word for love is eros, from which we get the word erotica. Now, this is love given with the expectation of mutual return. And when done right, who's the giver and who's the receiver become a blur. A third Greek word for love is philios, or brotherly love, or friendship. The city of Philadelphia is named for this type of love. So often, preachers, including myself, have lifted up agape, have encouraged people to have unconditional love or charity for one another. But I have come to the conclusion that human love should be conditional. Divine love has the luxury of being unconditional because an all-powerful being cannot be hurt. We mere mortals can. The biggest condition put on love is to love your neighbor as yourself. In order to do this, one must love oneself. Imagine seeing someone drowning in a sea of hate because they do not know how to swim or to love. Now, if we do not know how to swim or love, it does no good for us to jump in and try to save them. The result will be two people drowning. Or worse, they may hold you underwater while they keep their head above. They kill you to survive. This is abuse. Lifeguards are trained to avoid contact with someone who is drowning. Not because they do not love this person or hope for their survival. They know the danger of interacting with people who are irrational and panicking. They're to use a flotation device to avoid contact, to keep one's distance. And if they do have to directly interact with the victim, they're taught combat techniques to subdue the drowning person so they can be rescued. You dive underwater, you grab them below the knees, you turn them around, you climb up their body and put them in a cross-stitch carry, jam your hip up into their back so you have control and can carry them to shore. It's like wrestling. You need to win the battle to save the day. Kindness doesn't enter into the equation because the panicked person thinks only of themselves. And in that way, they are like an abuser, irrational and self-centered. The rescuer needs to panic themselves from abuse. Jesus told his disciples as much when he sent them to preach the gospel. In Matthew 10, he wrote, "And when you come to a house, salute it. And if the house be worthy, let your peace come upon it. But if not, let your peace return to you. And whosoever shall not receive you, nor hear your words, when you depart of that house or city, shake the dust off your feet. Behold, I send you forth as sheep in the midst of wolves, and therefore be as wise as serpents, but as harmless as dove." Jesus is telling his disciples not to attack those who disagree, but be ready to escape if necessary. And leave bad experiences behind. Don't carry that hurt of that interaction with you. Shake the dust off your feet. This eyes-open evangelism does not necessarily trust everybody. It is aware of the possibility of abuse, and true love does not require that we subject ourselves to abuse. Much of the information I'm drawing from today comes from adult children of alcoholics, where they talk about the different dynamics that affect a person as they live and grow up in an abusive system. And I also am lifting up that we in the United States of America are children of an abusive system. We have long been abused by white supremacy, the antithesis of love. A month after an insurrection in which the Confederate flag was flown in our nation's capital, there are calls for unity. Put the past behind us. It's like when a drunk sobers up and tells their spouse to forget about last night. Let's focus on the future. A physical abuser will try to blame the victim. You made me lose my temper. Be sweet, and it will never happen again. The sexual abuser will swear the victim to secrecy. What will people think of you? It will be your fault if I get in trouble. All abuse relies on lies. Pretend it does not happen. Pretend that it really was not that bad. And the biggest lie of the abuser is that if you really loved me, you would not make me do these things. If you only obeyed the law, I would not have to declare martial law and beat you over the head with clubs and throw tear gas into the street. Adult children of alcoholics have outlined different responses children have to abuse. This nation is addicted to racism and violence. So even if you grew up in a so-called functional family, you may have some of these traits. If our families were well adjusted to a sick social system, maybe it's time we listen to Martin Luther King Jr. and become maladjusted. Because even in a nation of white privilege, white people lose. Being the favorite child in an abusive system doesn't mean that you did not witness abuse. It does not mean that you are told to ignore abuse. It does not mean that you're supposed to shut down your feelings in order to get on with life. It keeps us from being whole people. Kathy Berman outlines some of these family roles on her website. Family roles, emotional sobriety means healing mind, body, and soul. I'll read her definitions of the different roles and then add some of my own commentary about today's social situation. Some of the personality types are family hero, an achiever, usually but not always the oldest child, often a workaholic who can identify others' needs and meet them, but is without an understanding of their own needs. This is often the child who uses their success to find a sense of belonging, the one who shows that the family is all right, but is unable to feel the benefit of his or her achievements. They feel like a fraud and are subject to depression, which they hide from those around them. This is why the richest in our nations feel they have to live in gated communities. They have escaped the abuse, but yet it still determines how they see the world and the paranoia that is created. Our current social system will find heroes that give us hope. But we must remember not to be blinded by hope. For every person who is celebrated as coming from poverty and rising to riches in this country, there are hundreds who don't make it. And we are told to look at the heroes and ignore the victims. And if there is a hero, we cannot rest from our own responsibility. because it's everybody's job to fight racism and the violence that stems from it. So when we listen to a speech of somebody who inspires us and all we come away with is a warm feeling, and it doesn't inspire us to actively love our neighbor, we are participating in hero worship and not being the hero that is needed in our own life. The rescuer. Similar to the family hero, but without visible success. The rescuer finds those in need and lets them move in or marries them or finds a job for them while supply other needs and is very understanding of the frequent betrayals. The rescuer has a deep-seated self-hate that drives them to their role as savior because they know that not anybody already on the bottom of a barrel will have nothing to do with them. They tend to feel inadequate, and they're giving and unable to accept help for their own needs. This is the trap that the white liberal often falls into, the Unitarian Universalist Church, that sense of, I'm here to help. I'm here to help those poor people over there. And they're not even looking at their own wounds. I think in the recent years of these anonymous letters from staffers at the White House who tried to assure us that they were keeping President Trump from going off the rails, the so-called adults in the room failed to stop the sacking of the U.S. Capitol. They want to take credit for saving democracy while they were complicit with its destruction. The rescuer is often called in Alcoholics Anonymous parlance as the enabler, the person who makes sure that all the mistakes by the person or the system are covered up and fixed, and so that no one faces consequences of their behavior. The mascot. Often a younger child who uses humor or distracting behavior, such as being exceptionally clumsy or always in trouble, not real trouble, but just mischief, to take the focus of the family away from the problems of family dysfunction. If the parent is violently drunk, the mascot may take abuse to save the rest of the family, or may be able to crack a joke at the necessary moments just to take everybody's mind off the current reality. In our current situation, for the past 15 years, I have loved the late night comics who are able to poke fun at the horrors of our situation. It has been a relief to laugh when we are in so much peril. But we have to ask ourselves, when is it time to stop laughing and get to work? Dr. Berman continues with her descriptions of the roles in identifying the adjuster, the one who is never bothered by what is happening. There's no reason to be excited because everyone has to live with family problems. The child never becomes too attached to a goal or a desire because they have learned to change their direction at any moment. They float, knowing that something is wrong, but coping, often successfully, with one chaotic system after another, by surrendering their own identity and their needs to the moment. Many of us have trouble planning. If we're adjusters, we have trouble facing problems. We hope that if we don't mention the problem, it will go away. Many of us wish that such topics such as today's sermon weren't discussed in church. Talking about such things is unsettling and upsetting. They want the church to be charitable, to provide unconditional love. We may feed the poor, but we must never ever question why there are poor. Another role is the doormat. The abused child who survives by lying down and letting others walk all over him or her, rather than risk an unpleasant or dangerous confrontation. This child is very understanding of the needs of someone else may have to injure him or her, but can't identify his or her feelings about the abuse in the past or the present. It's the person that says, I'm tough, I can take it, no problem here. Some of us are just plain worn out. The rich get richer and the poor get poorer. What's the use of trying anymore? Bern goes on to describe the acting out child or the rebel. This child is an action at the slightest provocation, whether it's an heroic action to prevent or abuse to someone else by distracting the abuser or to protect himself or herself in the wildness. This is the child most visible to the outside world in the family. This is the one who dyes their hair purple, who may adopt alcoholism, drug addiction, or other compulsive behaviors early in defiance of the family system. They're the ones that scream from the top of the mountaintop, this is wrong. This is not the way it should be. Black Lives Matter, feminists, Native Americans, water protectors, advocates for the poor, and other radicals scream just so they can be heard. They'll do something as silly as knit pink hats and wear them in the street. But they are usually dismissed as crazies by the rest of the system. Or in the South, the family will say, well, bless her heart. Another role is described as the scapegoat. This child takes the blame and shame for the actions of other family members by being the most visibly dysfunctional. This child serves the family by being sick or crazy to allow the other members of the family to ignore their own dysfunction. This is, in some ways, the child that holds the family together. The family rallies to help the family jerk. He or she learns to remain dysfunctional, to continue receiving the little attention available in a dysfunctional home by making the family okay, by being the focus of all that is not okay. Some of those who stormed the White House will face criminal charges. They will be blamed for the incidents. The rich and the powerful who incited the crowd, organized and paid for the rally, will distance themselves. Many who have access to lawyers and power will say that the rabble acted on their own. The scapegoats will take the focus off the real perpetrators. Another role in the abusive family is the bully. This child is usually the victim of physical, sexual, and or emotional abuse who successfully makes the mental transition to stop being the victim by victimizing others. Often the bully is genuinely remorseful for the pain and suffering caused to others, but will continue inflicting that abuse rather than face his or her own pain. The bully is the person who thinks that the pandemic is a hoax, yet still wants to attack Asian Americans, which caused the China virus. This rage makes no sense, and this rage keeps them from self-reflection. It does not have to make sense. It only reinforces the sickness of white supremacy and violence. Often bullies do the work of bigger bullies because they are afraid that if they did not, they would be bullied. And the final description I'll give you this morning is the lost child. Often the younger or youngest child, this person has learned to stay out of the way, not to make his or her wants known, and to expect nothing. They avoid feeling by denying that they have feelings. They adopt whatever behavior will allow them to stay invisible within the family, at work, at school, or in a relationship. This is the child who can assume whatever personality those around them feel most or least threatening. In our society, I call these people the willfully ignorant, the tuned out, those who think that Kim Kardashian in filing divorce from Kanye West is the biggest news of the past week. Or in the words of the musical group Pink Floyd, there is no pain, you are receding, a distant ship smoke on the horizon. You are only coming through in waves, your lips move, but I can't hear what you're saying. When I was a child, I caught a fleeting glimpse out of the corner of my eye. I turned to look, but now it's gone. I cannot put my finger on it now. The child is grown, the dream is gone. I have become comfortably numb. I recognize myself in some of those roles. I grew up in a family where my father was an alcoholic. There was no serious abuse, but a lot of these dynamics were present. And I'm sure that some of you have recognized this from your own childhood, and we live with these roles that we learn very young. And if we never know that it's a role, we just think it's who we are. And we don't know that we have other options to love fully without subjecting ourselves to abuse. The solution is to become your own loving parent, to take responsibility for who you love and what you expect out of love, and to protect yourself when love goes bad. Because love does not always mean kindness. Sometimes we have to back away and let the addict hit bottom. Because as long as we're there nagging them, then we become the excuse for their drinking. And this growing up and unlearning what we learned as a child, the great American history of white people coming and making this country great, and the abuses we had in our family, whatever they were. This work can take a lifetime. A few years back, while she was still living, my mother-in-law called, and she wanted to talk to me because I was a minister and a social worker, and I definitely learned those rules of being the rescuer and fixer and placater in my family. So she recognized who I was, and I was the one to talk to, not her no-nonsense daughter. And she was upset that her big sisters were being mean to her. At the time, she was 76, and her sisters were 78 and 80. I just listened. I resisted my impulse to jump in and fix things because I was pretty sure that the sibling rivalry that happened in Tennessee back in the 1930s was not going to be fixed by me in this phone call. And sometimes that's what we have to do, is just listen to each other and not try to fix. Because the trying to fix is also a form of trying to control the situation to make everything seem better. Sometimes we have to live with the struggle. We have to learn how to love without subjecting ourselves to abuse. We must learn to name the abuse and not participate in it. But it gets so tangled. Often our best efforts are rejected, and there are some people we cannot reach. Our love is conditional because our lives are finite. Yet we love, because to hate is an even greater price to pay. It is tempting to hate the haters, but that only gives the haters what they want. Do not let anyone take your love from you. Guard it like a precious gift and share it however you can, conditionally, knowing that you have to love yourself to ever love others. May we bless and be blessed.